Unless you folks have been living under a rock, you've probably heard of Perplexity AI. You are a founder in maybe the hottest space right now. How do you kind of make sure you guys win? Because you're in a moment in time right now, which is quite unique.
Companies are all about recognizing one truth. And the best way for you to learn the truth is learn a bunch of small truths every single week. By the end of Friday, if you didn't learn something new that week about your own company or your product or your users, you failed that week.
You suddenly came out of quote unquote nowhere, but maybe go back in time a little bit. Walk us through maybe your academic path.
John Schulman, the guy who invented ChatGPT at OpenAI, invited me to do an internship. So that changed my life. I got into OpenAI, and that's when I knew this is the future. You got to work on unsupervised learning.
How does Perplexity stop itself from kind of being commoditized and kind of stay ahead of the curve?
Most people don't realize that.
Okay, folks, hey, we have a fantastic episode for you here today. Let me read this out. Aravind Srinivas is an Indian-American computer scientist, researcher, and programmer who's the founder and CEO of Perplexity AI, a company focused on building an AI chat-based search engine. He holds a master's in engineering from the IIT Madras, PhD in computer science from University of California, Berkeley. Srinivas worked as a research intern at OpenAI, DeepMind, Google. He co-founded Perplexity AI with Dennis Yartz and Andy Konvinsky, aiming to create an AI chat-based search engine utilizing advanced AI such as GPT-3. His work involves areas like deep learning, reinforcement learning, contrast learning, and generative models. Now, Aravind, you can guess where I just read that from. Because what I did is instead of I basically popped in who's Aravind Srinivas into Perplexity AI, and it kind of gave me a good summary on you. And unless you folks have been living under a rock, you've probably heard of Perplexity AI. You've definitely seen Aravind's tweets. He's probably one of the best people on Twitter. But Aravind, thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sriram. Thank you, Aarthi.
You know what? I'm going to get into some serious stuff in just a second. Let me ask you this. How did you get so good at Twitter? Like, what's the deal?
I mean, the A16Z joke, you're basically a media company and you're doing your actual thing as a hobby. I have looked at all you guys, Mark Andreessen uses Twitter really well. Elon uses Twitter. Sam Altman uses Twitter very well. So from the beginning, I knew that having a Twitter game is going to be very important, especially if you're directly targeting the consumer.
Yeah,
it's very hard.
Especially if you can now you've made $40 now out of Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah,
you can only go up from here.
I know. I want to read out one of your tweets just from 12 hours ago. Setting up my Stripe for getting my X earnings, finally earned $40 a month. Mark Andreessen agreed to talk more often. He no longer considers me poor. Explain this tweet.
Well, there was a TechCrunch article that said Mark Andreessen is out of touch with reality. When was the last time he talked with a poor person? Mm-hmm. Right? So it was a reference to that. And it was also a reference to the fact that X hardly pays anybody. So it was all a joke.
I love that.
They call these shit posts, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You're very good at it. Very good. My favorite one, Aravind, and I like this so much. I send it to all of these founders and CEOs I work with because Aravind sort of the company is obviously fantastic and you're a fantastic founder and so capable. But it's very rare for somebody to also then be very good at Twitter. So my favorite one recently is when you basically announced that everyone from Jensen Huang to everyone is joining Perplexity AI. So that is the thing, right? You have a lot of famous.
There was a small part of
rumor.
Yes, exactly. The rumor tweet.
Yeah. That was just for that was a shit post again. And then Yamazon replied to it saying, "Let's start another rumor. Ilya Sutskever is joining Perplexity." And then I quote-tweeted him saying neither confirm nor deny. And then actually journalists did message me and ask, "Hey, is Karpati joining Perplexity?"
And I hope you said cannot confirm or deny, no comment, right? It's just stay with that. Ladies and gentlemen, are Aarthi and Sriram going to join Perplexity AI? Can't confirm or deny. Stay tuned to find out.
Aravind should be saying that, not as Sriram. I don't think you're getting how this all works. For a VC, you're not really good at shit posts.
That is true. But it's hard to compete with Mark. He's the best. But I don't. Sort of joking aside, he's very good at Twitter, and I think that is a serious skill. I want to get a little bit of story a little bit, right? Because I think for a lot of people who might be following this show, you kind of suddenly came out of quote unquote nowhere, maybe a year or so ago, and obviously a lot of people now have Perplexity on their home page or on their home screen. But maybe go back in time a little bit, right? Like walk us through maybe your academic path. So you went to IIT, right? Walk us through that time and maybe that era of Aravind.
I joined IIT not because I wanted to build stuff or anything like that. That was the thing that garnered enough respect and status, and I chased it just like everybody else. Math, physics, chemistry, all these things came pretty naturally. Like I didn't have to work. I worked hard. That's not what I'm trying to say, but it working hard to be better than the other best people rather than like working hard to actually understand things. That part was never hard. But I was disappointed. Like I didn't get computer science in IIT Madras. And my friends who coached, were training together with me for JEE, all got into computer science. And for a whole 1 year, I was just depressed. And I mostly hung out with them. At the end of your first semester, IIT gives you an option to change your branch to if you get above a certain CGPA. And I missed that by 0.01.
Oh man.
I thought that was the end of the world. I was so mad at like myself, and I just like went into a whole shell. But that's when I discovered like a lot of these online lectures and like online competitive programming sites. And because I wasn't talking to anybody else, I was just like absorbing myself and learning all these things myself, trying to solve all these problems myself. I started coding a lot actually, mostly out of like, at that time as a kid, it was more out of like vengeance. Let me prove the world wrong. I'm actually good at this. But all that helped me later. Like I had a great background in Python way before other people at IIT, because Python was still not a language that even my computer science friends focused on. So I got a good hang of all these things that machine learning people use for no reason. I just learned it because I wanted to learn as much. NumPy, all this like scikit-learn, random ML contests. So I would just mostly keep learning. And all that helped me when I had a chance to take a machine learning class in my third year. That was actually run by the computer science department. And my professor at the time, he was like, I don't usually let electrical people take this class, but you guys are not going to do well. But maybe you can prove me wrong. And I ended up topping the class because I knew most of these things before. And even the assignments they would give, my CS friends would write for loops in Python because they don't know how to, actually write code in Python for taking whatever they learned in C++. So that sort of taught me, okay, there is something that comes more naturally from my electrical background. All the signal processing, linear algebra, probability, everything is so easy for me. So this is my thing. And I went super deep into ML, did a lot of research in my undergrad. I didn't realize then, but I was good at making deals even back then, where there were these senior students in the lab of my professor, and they would all have these GPU cards. And I would tell them, hey, give me your cards. They would be using it for playing games in the lab. And I would tell them, hey, you know what, like you can take my desk, whatever desk was allocated for me in the lab, you can take it. In return, I want your GPU. And I would stay in the hostel and run experiments on it. And that's how, when DeepMind wrote the DQN Learning to Play Atari Games paper, my professor was like, you should try to reproduce it. And then you should try to do research on top of it. So that's how I got started into neural nets. And ever since then, I've been really obsessed about deep learning and RL. That got me an internship with Yoshua Bengio. He's the Turing Award winner from Montreal. And he wrote a letter for me for PhD admissions. And I applied only to 2 schools, actually, MIT and Berkeley. MIT rejected me. Berkeley admitted me. I remember going to my mom and saying, hey, mom, I think I'm going to Berkeley. And I was like, what is Berkeley? Did you get into MIT or Stanford? Because nobody in India actually, at least like my mom didn't know what even Berkeley is.
By the way, that is for every Indian who listening to this, they're like, yeah, I totally understand that. And everyone else like, what are we talking about? So that is such a South Indian thing or an Indian thing, totally.
Yeah, exactly. And my mom was like disappointed. Oh, but you didn't get MIT. She was like, no, I'm on the wait list. Maybe I might get it, but Berkeley is the one that's confirmed. Okay, let's wait till the wait list. Don't confirm with Berkeley. And until the last date, we waited. She was like, MIT, that's like same thing, same logic. But at that time, MIT was not even a good school for deep learning. And so that got me to Berkeley. And John Schulman, the guy who invented ChatGPT at OpenAI, he was also from Berkeley. He noticed my work and he invited me to do an internship. So that changed my life. I got into OpenAI then for an intern in 2018. This was when Musk was still there in OpenAI. And I remember Musk left OpenAI around the time I joined. And I was idolizing this guy. And then he calls at all hands and like announces that he's no longer going to be involved and swears at people left, right, and center and just leaves the room. It was a lot of drama. There was no HR in the startup. Like I had to wait for like 3 weeks to even get a laptop. And they had no security. You could just clone the code base and use it in your personal laptop because they were just an open source nonprofit at the time. So it's not like you need all this. Ilya Sutskever was basically running the company. And from there, I obviously was humbled. I thought I was a good top of the field research, like young researcher, and like I got like basically destroyed there. The people were way faster, and like GPT-1 was being invented at the time by this amazingly talented guy named Alec Radford. And that's when I knew that all this stuff I've been doing was based. This is the future. You got to work on unsupervised learning. Went back to Berkeley, told my advisor, we need to stop working on RL and start working on generative models and unsupervised learning. Spent like 6 months in my PhD after my internship doing no research, just reading about unsupervised learning because I came to do RL research, but transition. And that was like stressful, but also like one of my most important times. Like, and I learned so much. Like I had no experience running large GPU jobs. Like usually people don't join PhD to like do a lot of systems engineering or like software engineering. Like nobody likes the task of writing data loaders, learning how to run a model on like 8 GPUs instead of 1 GPU. Everybody just wants to call the existing library and do it. But I could clearly see at OpenAI what happened if you just did that additional work, no new ideas, just take the existing ideas, but just do the additional work of running on more GPUs and training on more data, the magic that happened. So I put in all that effort to learn that myself during the next 6 months of PhD. And then I did some good work that got noticed by DeepMind, and they invited me for an internship. So that's how my career basically progressed. Every time I would look at something, I would realize I'm short of like, being at the top level, identify what I needed to do and just go all in on that. And I'm very proud. Like those were formative years for me.
I want to get to Perplexity in just a second, but it's kind of interesting because you kind of, some people kind of make fun of me that I've kind of checked the checkbox of all the big social media companies, but you kind of check the checkboxes of, for what is probably, hopefully, Perplexity is going to be an iconic
and
company.
I'm sure you didn't do it. I'm sure you didn't do it just to get it to look good on your LinkedIn, right?
No.
I followed your...
No, I was not trying to be sort of a social media Thanos collecting the Infinity Gauntlet stones. But, you've been at both DeepMind and OpenAI, a very different era, obviously. But kind of compare and contrast maybe the cultures and the operations. And obviously you were at a different time than what is happening now. But what is for people who have not seen the inside, compare and contrast?
I think I would say during my PhD years, DeepMind was the king. OpenAI was like this small startup trying to unsettle the king, but the king was always the top. And DeepMind had a very British culture. Like research scientists were at a higher status, research engineers were at a lower status, and then managers or like directors were like an higher status, and like whatever, right? Like Demis was the highest. So it was run in a very British hierarchical way, where REs were meant to serve the research scientists. And it was not cool for research scientists to like go and dig into the details and like run jobs. It was more about coming up with a new idea on the whiteboard and like making magic happen. And there were research scientists that did that at DeepMind well. It's to be very accurate. There were a few people like David Silver who just invent AlphaZero in a vacation on a piece of paper. So they did want people to be like that. But OpenAI was the opposite. There were these humble, not even completed undergrad or like random college people, just trying to like write code and like do the simplest things of scaling software across like bunch of GPUs, and then getting even better results. Some of them were like Alec Radford, Greg Brockman. These were all like, DeepMind would just make them research engineers and make them like work on projects that were run by research scientists. OpenAI, on the other hand, they were like, you have the guidance of this amazing guy named Ilya Sutskever, but you can do whatever you want. Like, and you own the project and you can take it from conception to end. And they made, and initially OpenAI's mistake was copying DeepMind and everything, trying to hire the exact people DeepMind were trying to hire, going after all their famous researchers. And those guys, some of them ended up joining OpenAI, but they didn't end up like making an impact at OpenAI. On the other hand, the guys they hired that were different nature, the people that DeepMind wouldn't hire, are the ones who changed OpenAI's destiny. Like Alec Radford, Dario, these were guys that were like outside the core AI background. And then they approached it, like, what does it mean to be intelligent in a very different way? They're like, maybe intelligence just emerges from training on a lot of data on the internet, right? Instead of like, but DeepMind's approach was...
Why do you think that was?
Yeah.
What made them come in? And was it like the cultural difference between OpenAI? Like what made them be more successful on OpenAI and be able to try different things?
Because these guys were not PhDs who had published a lot of papers. So they would not be even hired as research scientists, right? So they would be treated as research engineers. And in DeepMind, the culture is the research engineer serves the research scientist. You're like, it's a British culture. You're aware, you're all Indians, like we know what we lived through and like, I guess. So
there is like a hierarchy and you kind of like fit into that hierarchical standards. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And OpenAI disrupted that hierarchy. Maybe that is the true thing to be said. That was in terms of company structure, but also DeepMind's philosophy of like how intelligence emerges was you build a bunch of simulators and you train an agent to be really good at solving all these simulators at once. And that agent is the prototype of the AGI. This was the vision set forth by their chief scientist, Shane Leck. So for a long time, DeepMind would just benchmark agents on like thousands of simulations and keep building new simulations. OpenAI initially was in the same approach too, when they were building these projects like OpenAI Universe and stuff like that. But when those projects kind of failed, they took a long look and said, we need to work on like some very hard problem like Dota or something like that. And they realized their success at Dota was not through clever algorithms, but just scaling up the simplest thing. And then they went all in on scale. And simultaneously, Alec Radford made a breakthrough that predicting the next word on the internet gives you like very good general purpose language models. Together, then they connected the two insights. Like Dario connected the two insights saying, okay, scale works, language model works. Why don't we put the two together? So let's go to large language models, LLM. So that became GPT-2. In fact, I remember Alec told me once that after GPT-1 was published, BERT from Google came out. And BERT questioned the whole idea that you even need to predict in a unidirectional way. Why don't you do bidirectional prediction if you just want a checkpoint that you fine-tune? But OpenAI had the conviction that it's not about just fine-tuning. If you can train these models on a lot of data, cool skills like instructions following or like, things that you didn't even train for will emerge at test time. And that's how programmable computers can be built. And that's also their belief of how AGI can be built. So this was very different from DeepMind, and DeepMind didn't believe in blind scaling. Again, due to like eliteness, you want to like build clever algorithms. So this was the opportunity. They took it, and Microsoft came and gave them a lot of funding, and then everything changed.
There's a bunch of lessons to kind of unpack there. I mean, obviously these are brilliant people, and I'm generalizing, but I do think like when I went from Facebook to Snap, right? I remember in Facebook, engineers were king, and in Snap, designers were king, right? And it's not that one is better or worse than the other, but it's a total different, like who gets status, what ideas get pushed to, what they're optimizing for. And what you just said, I think fits a pattern where, and look, DeepMind and what Google is doing is amazing, and it's very, very early days for whatever plays out. But there is definitely a world
For
of
what it's worth, I want to clarify that Google Brain is not like this. I've also spent time at Google Brain. Google Brain retains the Mountain View American culture of early days of Google, where it's not like Jeff Dean, because he had a PhD, is about the status of like writing low-level code. In fact, he wrote a lot of low-level code that basically Google is still running on today.
Got it.
So
Got it. Yeah.
It's just DeepMind in the UK.
Yeah.
Is
Basically,
it fair
it's
to
a lot of it. Yeah. Sorry. Go on.
So is it fair to say that, like an organization which prioritizes publishing versus an organization which prioritizes engineering and usage wind up with basically the things that they're trying to optimize for?
Exactly. I think these are the. It's basically, it comes down to incentive structures. In fact, DeepMind didn't even care much about publishing in conferences. They only cared about getting a Nature paper or a Science paper, because that is what is the elite. Again, like in the US, if you meet professors here, nobody cares about Nature papers. They just want to publish. It's more being recognized by the elites is a thing that UK values more. At least that's my.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, it's funny because in 6 months of living in London, we're starting to see that here, right? Like, and this is also, London for us is like a midpoint of like the Indian culture and the American culture. It's like kind of meets halfway. And so we're starting to see a lot of that in like daily aspects of life. It's like completely unrelated to like tech and the work we do and all of that stuff. But also, I think, to what Sriram had said, to me, part of it is like, it's incentive structure. Part of it is also whoever's like the founder ethos, what the founder brings to the table or what the leadership team brings to the table. So in case of Snap, Evan Spiegel really focused on design. That was his thing. And so the company was entirely hinged on design being the priority, and the incentives all aligned on like design is like the first thing. Facebook was all much more product/eng driven. Like, and very, very focused on ship fast, ship often, get things out the door, be very scrappy. Done is better than perfect. And also Facebook had this like really great, like, I liked it because it had this like great underdog culture. Like this like monster of a company, and they would still be like, oh my God, this like little startup is going to come kill us. And so we have to like really wake up and like do this thing and like measure everything, and very, very quantitative, but really like chip on the shoulder, aggressive. We have to like, nothing's taken for granted. And so I just think it's like whoever's the founder and whatever ethos they have, it kind of trickles downwards into the company into various incentives.
Yep.
Yeah, that's fair. That's very fair. And like, the founders of OpenAI were obviously like fast moving, aggressive mindset people. Yeah.
I want to get to Perplexity, right? Like, because one of the things I remember the first time I heard about you guys, which was because Nat Friedman, who's a good friend, I think I'd written a tweet about the shipping velocity that you had. I forget exactly when, maybe a year ago or so. And at the time, you guys are much earlier. And I think that I want to kind of point to something, which is obviously the product is fantastic. And the day we are recording this, Jensen Huang, Justice on Wired, talking about how we use this Perplexity. A lot of people use it. You're very much active on Twitter. But I do think, look, we live in the era of a lot of people building on AI. You have a lot of people building very similar things to what you are doing. And Perplexity, it's awesome, but you kind of talk about the podcast. But one thing which I think is very interesting to me about what you do is there is a rate of shipping of product development, and also maybe kind of talking about it, getting energy around it on Twitter, elsewhere, which seems different than what I would categorize as the median, hey, we are going to build on a large foundation model, build an experience, right? Which, by the way, I don't want to take away from that. You guys build something awesome. But there's definitely a shipping cadence product thinking. And I'll just add something. I hate kind of talking about private conversation, but I remember the first time I talked to Aravind, I'll say this, I had some sort of random ideas, right? And the first thing, Aravind immediately then texts me back and he's like, oh, I popped this idea in our Slack, and he's like asking me about all these things. And I remember being like, oh, wait, nobody ever really does that. And by this, probably like totally BS. So there is definitely sort of an energy to it. Part, I want to kind of pay you a compliment, but part, I also want to understand, like, where does it come from? How do you sort of like, drive it into the culture?
I mean, from the beginning, I actually, for what it's worth, I was humble enough to acknowledge that I had no ethos or culture of my own to like, be very confident about. So I asked people like what is most important. Obviously, I asked Elon and Nat, and like both of them were early investors in us, and both of them, pointed one thing, which is companies are all about recognizing one truth, like one source of truth. The earlier you discover it, the better for you, because you can double down on it. And double down also means raise more money and allocate more budget towards it. The later you are to recognizing the truth, it doesn't matter how much budget you have, how many people you have, doesn't matter. And the best way for you to learn the truth is learn a bunch of small truths like every single week. Right? Like it's basically compounding, right? Like you learn one new thing every week, then you have a new follow-up question, you design, you experiment, you come back next week, you have more truth. And by the end of like 6 months, you just learn so much about the world that now you know exactly what the company should be, right? And for me, it was not just about what product or what sector. It was also like what is the culture that should work? What is the people that we should hire? Everything was just a matter of experimentation and like learning. And obviously you cannot learn stuff fast unless you ship fast and try and fail. Software is the only industry where you can fail fast. You cannot fail fast in like if you're building a company like SpaceX or Blue Origin or something, or even biotech. You cannot fail fast. So if you work in software, you have to fail fast. There are not many companies that did not fail fast and still succeeded. You might even think, and maybe it's an exception and it doesn't apply to NVIDIA, but if you watch Jensen's Stanford lecture, he also talks about how failure happens to everybody who experiments, and you have to fail fast. And without experimentation, you just don't learn. So Perplexity has always been about the experimentation culture. In the beginning, we tried like so many products under the sun, because for us, it was like, let's just get something out ASAP. And you cannot get something out every week. Like there are some founders I know who just keep putting new products every week out of the same company. That cannot work. You cannot hire new employees if you do that. So we would test a lot with like people we knew around us. They wouldn't judge us for trying new things, and we would quickly learn. And that got us the muscle. The muscle was at the end of Friday. This is what Nat Friedman told me. By the end of Friday, if you didn't learn something new that week about your own company or your product or your users, you failed that week. And you don't want to fail, right? Like nobody wants to fail. It's not fun. So if you mark that as a failure, that by end of Friday, nothing new was learned that week, then you will be pretty intense. You try to learn something new about your product or your users or your roadmap or your like business. And it still happens this week until today. Like every Friday, I run all hands and I tell exactly like what we learned this week.
Yeah. Now, can I maybe push you to kind of break it down a bit further? Because I totally obviously agree and love what you're saying. And I think we kind of talked about speed and cadence being the rhythm, the clock speed being one of the best things you can switch, right? But translate that philosophy into like sort of like specifics. That's what you do in meetings or how you do product roadmaps, or what does it kind of translate into in ways which may be unique for you that other companies may not be doing?
Well, one thing I've done is avoid meetings as much as possible, and try to communicate on Slack, directly, text. And the reason I do that is because it forces people to get to the point faster. Like you cannot beat around the bush on Slack because nobody likes to type really long messages. Nobody likes to read long messages. So you have to get to the point. You have to act. Sometimes though this was somewhat counterproductive in the beginning, we would even run arguments on Slack. Like arguments as in debates. I'm not talking literally like personal arguments, but debates on what we should be doing. Even that would be on Slack, because that way I felt like people didn't have to like cut down. They could just say exactly what they wanted. Be factful. Like everything's there in the context. Like you don't have to put it all in your head. And at the end, like you can even look at and see like if you're making logical arguments or not, and specifically reply to certain things, not get lost across like too many people talking at the same time. So those kind of things I did very differently from what other companies have done. Obviously not scalable. Like, right now, like if you argue on a public Slack channel in front of like 30, 40 people, it's not not a good look for the company, and new people might be like, what's going on here? But early days, it really helps to like get to truth. Basically, if you can create the first 5 to 10 people who are truth seeking rather than social animals,
Yeah.
right? Like you can actually win, because
Yeah.
being truth seeking is hard. Like this is also what Bezos said in the Lex podcast. Like we are not designed to be truth seeking. Like nobody likes to hear the truth that they're not doing well, or like this thing is not working, or like even if somebody comes and asks, hey, this thing is not working, but maybe you have the conviction here, explain to me why you still think this is worth doing. Nobody likes to do all that. Like, wait, man, like why are you coming and asking me? Just go do the thing that you're assigned. But they should ask, because that's what forces you to like think even more. And this is the culture we set in the beginning, and that really helped us a lot.
I think that was probably my favorite part of the Lex Bezos podcast, where to me it was like a light bulb moment, where it was like I've been trying to articulate why the meeting culture or excessive meetings is just detrimental, right? Like everybody understands the time sink and all of that, but the reality is you spend a lot of time trying to it's a bit like less focus on the tautology of it, on whether you should do something or not do something, and more about like how to frame it and how to position it and who's incentivized to do what, and all these like mechanisms on like people and psychology. And Sriram knows this, where it's like I think it is exhausting for me to like think about it as like, oh, okay, now in this meeting you have to say this, and this there is this order, and there is like you have to like sequences, and then you sort of lose focus on why are we here, what did we want to do, and what is the thing that you want to get out of it. And so meetings by itself is not bad, but it's really about how people have like started to abuse the nature of it, to not look at the output but look at the process itself as the output. I think that's the problem.
And also, leading by consensus is not a good thing. Like,
yes, I agree.
Have a stakeholder, have a decision maker, and you know, like you can influence them, but let them take the decision at the end of the day. Yeah, and you know, like that definitely helps. Like, especially also like design, you know, product design shouldn't be by consensus. There should be like one person making decisions.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, one thing that I was listening to one of your other talks on YouTube, and this was intriguing because I think the question was, you know, who's your favorite entrepreneur? And I fully expected you to say, you know, Zuckerberg or Elon Musk or, you know, Steve Jobs. Like those, usually, you know, there's like the Silicon Valley mythos, like the set of people who always get picked. And you said Larry Page. And I was really curious because, you know, we've met Larry once. We think he's spectacular. But curious to see why, you know, you picked him, or what about him was like resonating for you.
I admire all of these guys for what it's worth. It's impossible not to. They all are amazing. I guess I could relate more to Larry Page because he's the only academic turned entrepreneur out of all these. I watched the movie Pirates of Silicon Valley. I know you both like it too.
It is our sort of like the movie which brought us together, you know, romance level. So yes, best team movie of all time.
Yeah, I loved it. I watched it before I came to the US here. I wanted to find an example that was more like not an undergrad dropout, right? When both of these guys were, Zuckerberg was too. YC was basically popularizing that a lot. Sam Altman was. So even Sam Altman went to the extent of saying, we don't fund lower middle class. We only fund upper middle class people in YC because that's what our data suggests that's the highest correlation. So I basically was like, okay, there's just no way you can do a company. And then I see Larry Page's story. Like he's not from a very well-to-do family. I mean, like obviously way better than I was, but you know, compared to American standards, not. And he was an academic. His dad was an academic, and like his core idea was inspired by citations, like Google Scholar, right? Like PageRank. So that was, and I've read about all the early days of Google Books, and his philosophy of like the user is never wrong in product design is very amazing. Like that is only other entrepreneur was taught that way is like Steve Jobs, and then that shows in how, or I guess Bezos too, in terms of Amazon design, the first early days, one click buy. Like basically let the product do the magic for you. Like don't you don't need to teach people to use products. Like products should be like so intuitive, right? And that obsession about latency, and the contrarian thinking about, when Google started off and got the funding, he could have gone and hired business development people, right? He went and hired PhDs,
Yeah.
and like the reason was, we need to be better at search. Like nothing else matters. We don't need to build a business. We just need to be better at search. And if we are better at search, more people will use us. And when more people will use us, we'll eventually figure out how to build a business. And it's not like he didn't care about building a business. In fact, there's a book where it says, John Doerr asks him, "Hey, Larry, in the potential scenario where this could make money, how much money do you think it could make?" And like, he's like, $1 billion. Oh, do you mean $1 billion in market cap? No, I mean $1 billion in revenue.
I don't know.
And like Doerr was like stumped. I was like, damn, this guy actually truly believes. Because they were investing at $100 million market cap. So they was like, okay, even 10x is great. But this guy was like, no, I actually mean we can make $1 billion in revenue.
Yeah.
So sort of audacious thinking and obsession about scale and latency and great user design, like user-centric product design, is what I really like about him, and his academic background.
I want to get to Perplexity and the positioning right now. I think it's funny. But before that, because you just mentioned your background in IIT, some people watching this are probably going to be you from back when you were at IIT. I know you just visited there and, did a bunch of talks there. So for somebody who's watching, they just finished high school, they got, they finished IIT JE, they got into IIT Madras or whatever, they're kind of hanging out there. What would you ask them to do? How would you want them to think about the next 5-10 years of their life looking back now? Because they probably they definitely look up to somebody like you.
Work like hell, like work so hard. These are the best years of your life. Just give it everything, If I wish I went back and like change something, I would have just worked even harder. I worked hard, but like could have worked even harder. Yeah. And the reason I say this is because, those were the days when I could pull 3 all-nighters in a week, no problem. Like body adjusts. I can eat whatever I want. I can eat at 3 a.m. in the night and like no stomach upsets, nothing. Now I can't do that. Like I need to actually, I'm not that old, but still,
Hold on. Like, did he just call us like old? He was like,
I know.
Yeah.
There was like a backhanded insult in there.
No.
Even denying it. Arvind's not even denying it. Oh my goodness. All right.
Hold on.
All right. We're going to make this podcast very hard right now. It's going to change tone. All right. Go for it.
Brian Johnson hopefully helps us all like live forever. But
That's
anyway,
true.
the main point I'm trying to make is that even mentally, the amount of concentration power you have for a significant unblocked period of time, is going to get lower. So I would advise you all to work harder, seek more opportunities, cold email people. It's fine. Obviously, Sriram, you've given a lot of advice on how to do that effectively instead of just to be able to stand out. All these things matter. Like the way you message, what is the win for the person who's reading it to help you? Like you should think through all these things, but try your best. Keep giving yourself more shots. Life is about like luck surface area, right? You're not gonna there are always people I know. I've had these friends even in undergrad, and if I meet them now, they're pretty much the same. They talk the exact same way, where they're all like, "Oh, that guy got lucky." And like that's fundamental. So change your attitude. It's easier to change your attitude when you're younger than older. It's hard because attitude change requires you to rewire your neural circuit a lot. Whereas learning new things that you already don't know is much easier in terms of gradient updates. So get to the right attitude that don't blame it on luck. Just give yourself more shots at success. And like everybody gets lucky chances in their life. It's more about making sure you have enough surface area. Try and that can only happen if you're opportunistic and like work super hard.
Love it. I love it.
I love it. I think the only thing I would add to that is on the attitude changes. I think it's going to be very important for you to surround yourself with the right people. And somebody watching this will be like, well, I'm sitting in this hostel room, or dorm room, wherever.
Yeah.
How do I do that? And I think that's where the power of this stuff, online communities, etc. Right?
Exactly.
I'm sure you're like one DM, one Discord server away from any one of us or anybody here that really matters. And I think people are like, I don't know what's wrong with my attitude. It's very hard to understand that until you are in a WhatsApp group or a DM group or hanging out with 20 other people. Then you like,
Right.
oh, I see what that means. Then you can
Yeah.
take it. So, and I think that's
Yeah,
one of the
I agree. I think Aravind, you had also like said that in one of the talks I'd seen where you'd said something like one of the things Sriram and I talk about a lot is it is very hard to point to a culture or take somebody who's never like worked in a high performance, high productivity culture, and point to something like that and say that is how things are done and get them to understand it. You fundamentally have to be immersed in it and work with people like better than yourself, smarter than yourself, works harder than yourself for you to like understand it. And one of the things that brought a smile to my face is when you talked about how, when you went to IIT Madras, it's like a pinnacle, like, anybody in India like knows IITs are like the gold standard of universities. Then you went to Berkeley, and for what you're studying again, like gold standard. And you thought, oh yeah, I'm like really smart, I've made it. And then you joined OpenAI and you're like, actually, I'm not that smart. Like there are these people who are like much smarter than me, and they're just like better. And I think it is really important to constantly surround yourself with people who are just going to challenge you and push you, because otherwise you just never know what you can be capable of.
Yeah, 100%. I also think it's very, very important. Like attitude wise, like intellectual honesty is the best like thing you can adopt. And like pretty much all the great leaders in the world have that, at least up to a certain point where they were like really growing rapidly during that time phase. When you know you're not the best at something, it's always good to like figure out like what you can be the best at, rather than thinking, oh, the guy better than you is just more lucky, or like he got it because he had a head start over you, and trying to blame the world and like trying to see what you can improve on your end.
Okay, since you called us old, I'm going to switch gears and ask you some tough questions. And he's not even denying it. I'm like, but so no,
That's okay. We are old, Sriram. We should just embrace it. We should just embrace it and move on.
No, we're not.
We're all going to live for like hundreds of years because
That's
Brian Johnson is solving.
Brian Johnson, the previous guest on our show, by the way. So you're kind of following on some. But on Perplexity, right? Let me kind of there is a common question, criticism that Perplexity get, which I'm sure you're kind of annoyed of answering, but maybe kind of a good chance for you to kind of like talk about this in this forum, which is in a world where these LLM providers, right, like are going to get bigger, more sophisticated, right? You sit on top of a few, right? What is, how does Perplexity stop itself from kind of being commoditized and kind of stay ahead of the curve? Like this kind of a different way of asking, okay, hey, if Gemini or Mistral or, GPT-X or Claude or whatever the thing may be, is just going to make this like so much better and better and better. How does Perplexity, which kind of sits on top of that, continuously evolve to add value? Or do you risk kind of like the models just kind of dominate, all the value, all the experience, all the stuff that you do, right? And I mean, you probably heard various versions of this, but this is probably the core. How do you think about that? And how do you kind of respond to that?
I mean, first of all, most people don't realize that even with just GPT-4, or like maybe a marginal betterment over GPT-4, the problem of answering a question given like a chat conversation is more or less solved. Like the long tail can only be solved by rolling out a product and creating the data flywheel and knowing where these models fail and like fine-tuning them and like, improving your index and things like that. And that can only be done by somebody who actually has so much user data on this one particular use case, which is us. We do not need a better model beyond what already exists. And there will be an open source model that will be of GPT-4 nature very soon. It's just a matter of time. It's inevitable that happens. So I will flip the whole commodity thing to the other direction, which is the models are going to be the one that are going to become commodity, not the products. And there is something unique about every product. Every consumer product will be unique in its own way, for its design, what emotions it invokes in the user, like its user experience, its accuracy, its speed, its reliability. And that's where we are focused on, right? And if we only do things that are just about answering questions, obviously, like, we're not gonna go too far. If you're literally like, oh, given any query, we just give you an LLM summarized answer. You got to do more. Like, look at Google, right? Like, if you type in like Djokovic, it just gives you the latest score. It's not just stopping with his bio or like Wikipedia page. So the user intent, you got to keep working on the user intent and innovate for the user and keep giving new things. And the internet and like online information keeps changing every day. That there needs to exist one company or at least multiple companies that are taking the responsibility of providing accurate information in the fastest and most readable way. That is what we are. Model is a tool for us. Models are the ones we think are going to be a commodity, unless somebody builds a AGI-like model, which is completely like next level. And that's not going to impact the product as much as you think, because you don't need that model to answer like the simplest queries. You're doing that model to probably do a lot more detailed, like agent-like work. And we're not in that market, actually, right? So most of these arguments about us not being a commodity is wrong. If we are a commodity, then why is it that even Gemini is not better than us or ChatGPT is not better than us? A commodity means like there needs to be 100 products like Perplexity, right? But the best engineers at Google or OpenAI or Meta are not able to make a chatbot as fast and accurate as Perplexity, which means whatever we're doing is actually not easy, right?
Right.
And I'm not saying that it'll never be possible for anybody to be as good, but it takes a lot of commitment and money and like talent to do this, that it basically debunks the commodity argument.
I think there's something very powerful there, which is when you have a set of people really focused on one thing, it is very hard to compete with that. Like, I'll give you a classic example. Like, I remember like 15 years ago, people would say like, oh, Dropbox, like anyone can go build that. But, for a long period of time, like they were just so focused on nailing the experience, nailing some hard technical problem that really was. Now, I think we kind of talked about the LLM side. I'm kind of curious on the other side of the equation, which is you have user experience where you live in a world where Google owns a web browser, Apple owns iOS. So kind of like the place where the users touch the pixels, right? So that is maybe the other sort of like for example, Sundar is a nice guy, fellow Tamilian, etc. But someday he became evil Sundar, right? He was like, and he was like, he's going to base Sundar, and he was like, I'm going to go crush Aravind, right? Like, what would he do? He'd be like, well, I'm going to basically make Chrome default to, Gemini, etc. Right? Like, whatever. So how do you think about that side on the distribution consumer access side?
I mean, firstly, he had the opportunity to do this all this while, right? It's not about him being based or good. It's more that their business model is what prevents him from doing this. He's in a position where he needs to like keep making the $17 billion of operating income every quarter, which is all coming from like not doing Gemini to everybody, right? So that is our opportunity. It's not about like him as a person. I think he's a good person. Like if you take away Google. Now, distribution wise, how we are thinking about it is we are supporting the next generation products like Arc browser or like Rabbit devices or like many other partnerships that we are going to announce. And it's easier for us to work with the up and coming ones than the bigger ones today, because the bigger ones are deeply locked in like many decades of relationships and like hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, maybe even for some people. For Apple, it's like tens of billions. So they're not going to like, it's also like kind of naive to expect them to change and come to you, right? And our goal is to accumulate users in whatever way possible. We're being very creative about it in like so many different ways that go beyond the traditional get yourself in a place where users are in terms of the pixels. And when we get to a point where we can actually compete on such deals, that's when interesting things can happen. And also the government is aware that, Google has basically bought its way into like every user rather than actually keeping up and innovating and being the best product. And so like at least our hope is in the future, even if Google is the default, every user will be asked to pick something at the beginning.
Yeah, but I think I love what you folks are doing the distribution BD side. It's kind of this, like for example, like every new company, I feel like you guys have a partnership. I was watching one of your podcasts recently, and you're talking about an incident where, if I paraphrase, like Meta, if I remember, kind of gave it's somebody that you wanted to kind of have work at Perplexity, like kind of this huge offer, kind of tempted him or her away. I think it was Meta or Google, I forget. Google, sorry, my bad. But I think I've heard similar versions of stories from Meta too. And I guess I want to kind of flip this a little bit to, you are a founder in maybe the hottest space right now. And there's a huge war for talent, huge war for maybe GPUs also a little while ago. So I'm kind of curious, how does it feel on the inside? Like, like how do you sort of like compete for talent? How do you sort of like, how do you kind of make sure you guys win when you're trying to close the next engineer or get the next batch of GPUs? Because you're in a moment in time right now, which is quite unique.
I mean, usually the argument for like big company versus us is obviously the fast speed and like, the Patrick Collison argument, like no matter how good you are or how bad you are, you're not going to make a big difference for their future. Like companies mostly run by PMs, VPs, and like whatever they want is decided by the board and CEO. Like, those are what matters. And it's very different from a startup. So that's the argument. And if you want to truly measure up, if you want to see if you're capable of something harder, the best way to like know that is come to a startup and like, jump into the water and see how you can swim. But then that argument works for people who are genuinely excited about challenges and not motivated by money. If someone is motivated by money and viewing startup as a way to make more money, then usually it's never a good thing. Usually the big company will match whatever we offer. Sure, we'll say you have more upside here. They'll say, okay, S&P 500 is growing too. Like it's not going to matter, and like liquidity in hand is better than like something like more risky. So I usually just give up. I just tell them, look, if you want something more than money, you come and join here. And I don't even want to attract people who are motivated by money today. You will become rich if company becomes successful. No questions about it. But don't join here if you're motivated by money, because I think there's this work-life balance wise, you're going to make way better in terms of money and trade-offs in terms of your time by staying back at Google or working at Meta or like, even like say working at another like 5,000, 10,000 employee startup.
But also that's adverse selection, right? Like you also almost don't want that cohort of people.
Yeah, we don't want. We are still like under 100, 150 people company, and I think the hunger and like the mission focus should be there. And the sooner you lose it, the more you will also operate like a big company and deal with like people problems and people complaining about pay or like not being happy. All these things will come very soon. And also it depends on the individual. Like some people do need money, by the way. Like I'm not judging anyone for being motivated by money. I understand what it means to be like that. In that case, it's really in your interest to go and work on that, like, and not like, try to solve two objectives at once.
I totally agree with that. One thing, we are getting close to time, we're past the hour mark. So I wanted to ask one question, which was, you'd initially said, right at the beginning of this on searching for the truth, right? Like, focusing on searching or getting to the truth. And you do that pretty much on like a weekly basis. When you started Perplexity, coming out of, DeepMind, OpenAI, all of that, and all the way to this journey now to like, if you put like a dotted line into the future, what is the truth that you are searching for or you're looking or hoping to find as far as Perplexity is concerned?
I would say Perplexity is also a truth-seeking product, and it helps people get knowledge and information in the most accurate way. So we have parallels between how we behave in terms of our culture and how the product embodies that. That's actually one thing I should have mentioned earlier, which is 3 values are like quality, like as in like truth, velocity, and accuracy. Like that we reflect in the product too by being fast moving, shipping fast, trying to be as accurate as possible and giving the answers, and like trying to like give like really well rendered formatted answers. And we reflect that in our culture too in terms of velocity, that like being like fast shipping culture, latency of the product being very fast, that there are parallels. And that's what I kind of like about this company, because that reflects the Ben Horowitz thing too, that what you do is who you are. So if you are by nature like fast, you don't want bureaucracy, then your product should also reflect that. And the best way to like constantly remind yourself what your product should be is how you behave on a day-to-day basis too. Similarly, like try to tell the truth. Don't beat around the bush. If somebody comes and asks you a question, try to give them a direct answer. Same thing with the product. Don't beat around the bush. Try to be as accurate and useful answer as possible. And like, I think that helped me. Reading that book here, I think the other book he wrote was Hard Thing About Hard Things, where best way to design culture is like through your actions. Like, Amazon designed frugality because that's what they wanted. So they enforced it by making these desks from wood from the door. So it's always in front of your eyes, right? So and like you wouldn't find such kind of broken desks in Square, where Dorsey actually cares about design. So these kind of things are important. And like I want Perplexity to always be a company that values accuracy and like conciseness and like being fast moving, because that's the best way we remind ourselves what the product should also be about.
I know it.
Wonderful. That's
I know
great.
it. I don't think you can end it better. Aravind, this is a blast. Thank you so much for coming. Right, like
Thank you, Sriram.
Thanks so much. This is brilliant, and happy to announce that all of us, we're going to be joining Perplexity. But
And
no,
thanks for Perplexity. Thanks for coming on our show, but also thanks for just building Perplexity. For me, I've basically replaced Google with Perplexity, I think I sent you a Twitter DM too. It's basically done a lot of work for me for podcast prep, for anything else that I want to do. You've saved me hours of time of just manually scrolling through a lot of blue links and trying to figure out like where is the value here. So this fantastic product. Thank you for building it, and I hope you keep crushing it.
Thank you, Sriram. Thank you, Aarthi.
No, thanks so much, Aravind.